This week on the Reform Factor, fundamentalism, an American Protestant movement breaking off from liberal churches. Some think it went too far. Evangelicalism came up to try and combat the view. Caution, you're about to enter the Billy Graham zone. The Reform Factor's on tonight. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Reform Factor. I'm your host, Peter Birdsell, coming to you from the RTS Library in Oviedo, Florida. I'm here reading a very large book. The memo for today is the fundamentalist movement broke off from major liberal mainline churches because of the doctrinal corruption that was going on at the time. However, because it broke off and felt so enclosed that they couldn't reach out to the culture, they ceased to be an influence in the culture at large. Evangelicalism came into being in order to reach out to the culture, so some people thought it wasn't as doctrinally sound. Joining us today will be Isaac Henderson and Aaron Vogel as we discuss evangelicalism, liberalism, fundamentalism, and Billy Graham. And welcome to our round-of-table discussion on the Reform Factor. I'm your host, Peter Birdsell, coming to you from the library at RTS Oviedo. We're discussing Alistair McGrath's book and the changing shape of American Protestantism. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen.
As always, that's the last 8 times.
I know. It doesn't seem like it's ever going to end. We're going to be talking about just liberalism in America quite a bit and some of the fundamentalist movements that sprung up to try and combat that. Any opening thoughts on the chapter?
Of course, Vogue goes straight to me. Yeah, forgive me for saying this. I really don't like the black and white definition he gives to either fundamentalists or evangelicals. It seems like he takes all of these different denominations, which of course they do have tendencies of one or the other, but then he just sort of blocks them in without actually looking at the denominations. And I think that's really what you should be doing in the kind of toss-up between what you would call a fundamental church, be it Baptist or Presbyterian. You really can't determine which denomination is going to be which, unless of course you actually go to the congregation and talk to them and ask them about it. So that's one of my first thoughts.
Well, I actually wanted to look at liberalism through different networks, we'll say. They don't call themselves denominations, such as Calvary Chapel. They stay away from considering themselves as a denomination, more as a movement, but it really lacks authority and it really lacks accountability. And there's a couple other branches off of that are very similar, such as the Vineyard Movement and the Double Willow Network.
So would we count them as liberals or would we count them as more...
That's what I'm saying. It has to be a case-by-case kind of basis.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I almost want to make them more evangelical, but I think they're even a little bit that and more. Maybe they're more charismatic.
Yeah.
Sure. They're charismatic branches. So anyway.
But that's my big bone of contention with McGrath is he does not look at it a case-by-case basis. It's this big old 1,500-foot bird's eye view. And while you would appreciate that when it comes to actual history, this is more dealing with, I don't want to say sociology, but it's bordering on that because this is actual people now, rather than just events and people affecting them. As far as the kind of toss-up between fundamentalists and evangelicals, Peter, I believe you had a phrase.
Yes,
before.
there is a definition. Yeah. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek definition, but a liberal is someone who thinks Billy Graham is a fundamentalist. A fundamentalist is someone who thinks Billy Graham is a liberal, and an evangelical is someone who likes Billy Graham. So, there's your definition.
Well, I tell you what, I like Billy Graham in some things. His drive for the gospel, yes. His theology, not so much.
I know.
It is lacking. However, God still used him in a big way. Even pastor back home came to know Christ through Billy Graham movements and what he was doing. Yeah. So it was beneficial, although his theology definitely was and is lacking.
So I think that's what we really have to look at. Through the entirety of church history, you see this one trend. It's called the pendulum. Either you go to this side,
One under the other.
or you go to the other side. And what's happening with the difference between these two sects is fundamentalists is that they're going to look at what the Bible says and what it teaches, and they're going to teach it as law.
Right.
Now, Paul, of course, says this is ridiculous because we're saved under Christ, we're unified in Christ, we are no longer under that law. But then that turns into antinomianism, which a lot of, well, maybe not a lot of, but
No,
several.
it's a lot of. It is.
It's subconscious antinomianism that a lot of evangelical denominations, sort of practice. And like I said, I'm not using names because you have to look at each different church, each different denomination. It's got to be case by case, and that's what people don't understand is they box things into categories. Even in your own denomination, you would probably see yourself as fundamentalist. This is what is no dancing, no drinking, no whatever.
I wouldn't
else.
even count. I don't think he was counting that group. As
No.
fundamentalists.
But
I think fundamentalism could lead to that, but not always necessarily. Sometimes just straight up legalism leads to that. Because fundamentalism means these are what we deem to be the doctrines the church is teaching, what the Bible teaches, and this is what we're going to stick with.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, a fundamentalist could just be someone who's sticking with the Bible, what the Bible says, and they could still be out dancing and drinking and smoking.
Well, yeah,
Just
I would
because,
not agree.
frankly-
I would not disagree with that at all.
Right.
It's just not 9 times out of 10 it does seem to lead to legalism because it lacks it lacks the compassion I feel like evangelicals have, because what's happened is there's this giant rift where you've got the mind
Uh-huh.
in the fundamentals, you've got the heart in the evangelicals, and since they seem to be so diametrically opposed to one another, there's no actual consensus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on that, Vogie?
Oh, well, I was just thinking about how McGrath takes this big group that we're talking about, and it's all one. You know,
Right.
It's all within this one. Where you're exactly what you're talking about. It needs to be case by case, because that is such a broad range.
So I think he needs to write several more volumes on this subject.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about megachurches and different models of churches that we've seen sprung up in our time. He mentioned Vineyard, he mentioned Calvary Chapel, even Willow Creek. Now, I mean, you know, there's big discussion on whether megachurches should be a thing. I mean, frankly, what's nice about discovering and practicing different models of how to do church, it really does help you to adapt to whatever cultural situation you're in.
And it does.
It
but
does.
There is a specific authority structure
Right.
put out by the Apostle Paul. And it's hard. I'm not going to go out and condemn mega churches. I will condemn the ones I know because I know that they are completely, prosperity gospel oriented. And I think that kind of goes along with the mega church. If you see more prosperity in your church, you're going to be more, I suppose, encouraged to tithe.
Let me say something. A quote from the book on page 409. A major transformation of the religious life of the United States is underway. The megachurches are, in effect, becoming the new dioceses, with large numbers of orbiting planets. They are more responsive to social change, easier to manage, and cheaper to run than traditional denominations.
I would actually have to disagree with him on the easier to manage bit and also the diocese. The diocese, obviously, because a lot of these megachurches are their own authority structure. They're not accountable to one another. They're very disjointed. They're just for that area.
Part of the problem, yeah, even I've just noticed this type of church has always been around. Since the time of Rome, they had megachurches even in Rome. They did. It's what they had. And the thing is, with back then, that Episcopal, rule by one bishop was okay because they were getting up and running. But the problem is, it ran into what you're about to get into is accountability. And frankly, nowadays with megachurches that are trying to be structured around one pastor or one CEO kind of a pastor deal, that's when you bump into issues with it.
There's that too, and that's where the
Power
fact
hungry
that
comes in.
it's there's no way that this is easier to manage than a smaller church. Number one, because of the numbers. Although I think that might be what he's getting at, is that it's easier to manage since it's almost like he's categorizing the people. What I'm thinking of is the easier to manage bit is the fact that you're going to have to pastor 1,700 to 5,000 people.
Right.
That's what the church is called to do. It's not necessarily called only to preach the gospel. It's called to disciple the people.
So you'd have to have something set up or something.
You'd have to have something. You'd have to have it split up into some way. That's why I really can't go with mega churches, because it's very difficult to actually. There's a difference between preaching the gospel and living the gospel. They can preach the gospel. If they can't live the gospel, it's not going to mean a whole lot to the people. They're just going to go. They're going to listen. They're going to raise their hands in worship, which I'm not condemning.
Thank
I'm
you.
just saying.
Sounded like you were. No.
I'm just saying that's what they do.
What's your opinion of small groups?
I don't like the name, but
Idea?
For
I
something
would
that large, you need something.
You have to have.
I would prefer a
Small
little bit more of a
communities within
biblical
it.
term, but that's because I'm an antiquarian. Sorry.
Did you just say you're a frog?
No.
Okay, concluding comments, gentlemen.
Small defense of megachurches. I agree with everything you said, except you being amphibian. Megachurches are doable in a biblical way. It seems like there's two options. Either it is a prosperity gospel preaching church, and that's why they're a megachurch, or it's a highly populated area, and they do preach biblical truth, and therefore they're working off of that high population.
So that would be better for higher population.
Sure.
And I would
seen-
agree with that.
I've seen areas where sometimes the population is only 2,000 total, and you have a church that says, of 150 people that says we need to have a small group ministry, and I'm like,
Right.
with that number, you could have Bible studies.
You are a small group.
You
Yeah.
are a small group ministry.
Yeah, it's all about perspective. But
Yeah.
so either way, and as a megachurch, it is more difficult to have like one pastor working with 2,000 people.
why you need deacons and elders.
But yes, that's where
And
more
pastors.
leadership comes into place.
Yes.
Multiple pastors, they can work together and make it work, but
Okay.
it can be a challenge for sure, and we see that in today.
All right, thank you for joining me, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Isaac, Bogey. Next week, Charismatics and the Pentecostal movement. It's gonna be great. And that's it for this week's episode of The Reform Factor. I'm your host, Peter Birdsell, sitting on a bench in front of RTS Oviedo. The word of the day, bamput. Bamput. When you make stupid decisions, you're such a bamput. Have a good day.
Excuse me, where's your Pig Latin section?